"You think this tattoo makes me dangerous?" Clare Morgan's voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It cut through the roaring laughter of 30 Hells Angels bikers like a blade slicing clean through smoke. Derek Hayes had just ripped her sleeve up in front of every man in that clubhouse. He wanted humiliation. He wanted fear. He wanted to break something that looked breakable. But the woman standing in front of him didn't flinch. And in the far corner of the room, a man named Logan Carter set down his drink very slowly, because he recognized something burning behind her eyes that nobody else in that room could see. Something quiet and dangerous and ancient. This story is not what you think it is. Part 1. The Woman Who Walked In. The first time Clare Morgan walked into the Hells Angels clubhouse on Route 9, just outside of Red Creek, Colorado, she didn't say a word to anyone. She carried a duffel bag over one shoulder and a worn leather tool roll tucked under her arm. Her boots were old but clean. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight and efficient. She wore a long-sleeve flannel shirt buttoned all the way to the wrist, even though it was the middle of July, and the Colorado heat outside was brutal enough to crack the asphalt. She walked straight to the bar, set her bag down on a stool, looked the bartender dead in the eye, and said 5 words. "I heard you need a mechanic." The bartender, a thick-necked man everyone called Denny, looked her up and down like she was a menu item he didn't recognize. He didn't even try to hide what he was thinking. "Lady, you're lost. This ain't a place for walk-ins." "I'm not walking in, I'm applying." Denny laughed. He turned to the row of bikers behind him and shook his head slowly, like she'd just told the best joke he'd heard all week. "You hear that, boys? She's applying." A few of them chuckled. One of them whistled. Another one made a comment Claire filed away and chose not to respond to. But she didn't move. She stood there perfectly still, rooted. Like a woman who had walked into rooms full of men who didn't want her there so many times that she had simply learned how long to wait before they understood she wasn't leaving. That was the thing about Clare Morgan. She never fought to prove herself. She just refused to disappear. Denny finally shrugged and pointed toward the back hallway. "Talk to Hank. He runs the garage. If he says no, you walk. No arguments." Fair enough. Claire picked up her bag, moved through the hallway, and pushed open the heavy steel door that led to the garage bay. Inside, 3 men were bent over a row of Harley-Davidsons. The air was thick with oil gasoline, and years of cigarette smoke baked into the concrete. A cracked radio in the corner played something twangy and unapologetic. Nobody looked up when she walked in. Hank Purcell was leaning over a soft-tail wrench in one hand, cigarette burning between his knuckles. 62 years old, 30-plus years as a Hells Angel. Hands that looked like they'd been carved from granite by someone who wasn't interested in making them comfortable. Claire walked up and waited. Hank didn't acknowledge her for a full 60 seconds. Then, without lifting his eyes from the engine, he said, "Whatever you're selling, I ain't buying." "I'm not selling anything. I'm looking for work." He looked up then. His gaze swept from her face down to her boots and back up. He pulled the cigarette from his lips and flicked the ash. "You a mechanic?" "Yes." "What kind?" "The kind that fixes what other people give up on." One of the younger mechanics across the garage, a kid named Travis, snorted from behind a bike frame. "That's a hell of a line." Claire didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Hank. Hank studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he pointed to a 1998 Road King sitting in the far corner, covered in dust, clearly untouched for weeks. "Fix that. You got 1 hour. It runs, we talk. It don't. You leave, and you don't come back." Claire nodded once. No questions, no negotiating. No asking for help. She walked over, set her tool roll on the concrete, unrolled it methodically, and got to work. 41 minutes later, the Road King roared to life. The sound filled the garage like thunder rolling down a canyon. Travis dropped the socket wrench he was holding. The 2 other mechanics froze and stared. Even the radio seemed to go quiet for a moment. Hank didn't speak for almost 10 seconds. He walked over, crouched down, looked at what she'd done, and shook his head slowly. Ignition module was fried. Claire said, her voice flat and matter-of-fact. But that wasn't the real problem. The wiring harness had a short behind the voltage regulator. Somebody spliced in a wrong-gauge wire at some point, and it was draining current every time the engine turned over. That's why it cranked but never caught. Hank stared at her. "How long you been doing this?" "Long enough." "Where'd you learn?" Claire paused. It was the smallest hesitation, barely half a second. But Hank caught it like a man who had spent decades reading people in rooms full of noise. "Different places," she said. Hank took a long drag from his cigarette. He looked at the Road King. He looked at Claire. He looked at his cigarette. "You start tomorrow, 6 a.m., don't be late." And just like that, Clare Morgan became the only woman working in a Hells Angels garage in Red Creek, Colorado. Nobody welcomed her, nobody shook her hand, but nobody stopped her either. And in that world, not being stopped was sometimes the closest thing to an invitation you were going to get. Part 2. Earning the Quiet. The first 2 weeks were silent. Claire showed up before dawn every morning. She worked without complaint, without drama, and without asking for anything. She ate lunch alone at the bench outside the garage bay, always with her sleeves rolled down, always with a paperback in her other hand. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then her answers were short. Not rude, just efficient. Like every word cost her something, and she was careful about what she spent. The younger mechanics tried to test her, the way young men always test the person they feel threatened by. Travis, 24 years old and convinced he was sharper than he actually was, handed her a fuel-injected Dyna he'd been struggling with for 2 days. "Since you're the expert," he said with a smirk that telegraphed exactly what he expected to happen. Claire took the bike without a word. She had it running in 3 hours. She also found a hairline crack in the intake manifold that Travis had completely missed. When she handed him back the keys, she didn't gloat. She didn't mention the crack. She just said, "It's done," and went back to her own bay. Travis didn't speak to her for 2 days. But the second time he got stuck, a transmission issue on a Sportster making a grinding noise he couldn't locate, he swallowed whatever pride he had left and walked over. "You got a minute?" Claire looked up. "Yeah. That Sportster is making a sound I can't figure out." Claire wiped her hands on a rag and followed him to the bike. She listened to the engine for maybe 30 seconds. Then she got on her back and slid underneath. "Third gear engagement dog is chipped," she said from down on the floor. "You're hearing metal on metal every time it shifts. It's not the transmission itself. It's one tooth." Travis crouched down and looked at her. "How can you hear that practice?" She slid out, stood up, and walked back to her own work. Travis stood there trying to decide if he was impressed or embarrassed. He settled on both. That was how Claire earned her first quiet ally in that garage. Not through confrontation, through competence. And in a world where competence was the only real currency, it turned out to be worth more than she expected. Marcus Reed noticed her before anyone else truly did. Marcus was 67 years old and one of the oldest active members of the Red Creek chapter. He had been riding since he was 16. He had buried friends. He had survived 2 prison stints. He had outlasted a generation of men who believed they were invincible. He didn't talk much anymore, but he watched everything. And from the first day Clare Morgan walked into that garage, Marcus watched her with a quality of attention that the younger men didn't have the patience for. One evening, about 3 weeks in, Marcus found her sitting outside the garage, alone as the sun went down. She had a cup of coffee in one hand and was staring at nothing in particular. He sat down beside her without asking permission. For a while, neither of them spoke. That kind of comfortable, loaded silence that happens between 2 people who both understand something the world hasn't made easy. Then Marcus said, "You fix bikes like somebody who used to fix things that mattered more than bikes." Claire didn't answer right away. "That's a strange thing to say," she finally replied. "Maybe, but I've been around long enough to know what it looks like when someone's hands are trained for more than engines." Claire took a slow sip of her coffee. "You're observant. I'm old. Same thing." She almost smiled at that. Almost. Marcus leaned back and looked up at the Colorado sky, where the stars were just beginning to appear. "You don't have to tell me anything he said. I ain't asking. But I want you to know, whatever you're running from or running toward, you picked a strange place to stop. Maybe that's the point. Maybe." They sat in silence a few more minutes. Then Marcus stood, brushed the dust from his jeans, and looked down at her with the steady gaze of a man who had said everything he needed to say. "A person's scars tell a story," he said. "They don't tell you the ending." Clare looked up at him. For the first time since she arrived in Red Creek, something softened in her face. Not vulnerability, not weakness, something closer to recognition. Like she had been waiting a very long time for someone to say those exact words. "Thank you, Marcus." "Don't thank me yet. This place has a way of testing people." He walked away. Clare sat there long after he left, turning his words over in her mind, the way you turn a stone over to see what's underneath. She didn't know it yet, but Marcus Reed had just given her the first real warning, and she should have taken it more seriously. Part 3. The Man Who Pushed. Derek Hayes was the kind of man who filled a room just by walking into it, and not in the way that earns admiration. He was 44 years old, 6'3", and 240 pounds of certainty that the world worked the way he believed it worked. He had been a Hell's Angel for nearly 20 years, and he wore that history like a weapon he never put down. Derek believed in hierarchy. He believed in power. He believed the world made sense when strong people controlled weak people. And he spent most of his energy making sure everyone around him knew exactly where they stood in that equation. From the moment Clare Morgan started working at the garage, Derek Hayes decided she was a problem. Not because she had done anything wrong, because she didn't fit. She was a woman in a man's space. She was quiet in a world that rewarded noise. She kept her past locked behind a door she never opened. And Derek didn't trust what he couldn't understand. What he couldn't understand, he couldn't control. And what he couldn't control made him dangerous. The first time he came for her was a Thursday night gathering at the clubhouse. 30, maybe 40 people. Members, associates, girlfriends of members. Music loud enough to feel in your chest, beer flowing, air thick with smoke and that particular electricity that comes from a room full of people who live without guardrails. Clare was standing near the back, nursing a beer, staying out of the way. She had come because Hank told her it was expected. You work here, you show up. So she showed up. Derek spotted her from across the room. He had been drinking for 2 hours, and his eyes had that particular shine that comes right before something goes sideways. He walked straight toward her, and the people between them parted like water before a boat. "Hey, mechanic girl." Clare looked up. "You know, I've been thinking about you," Derek said. "That's flattering." A few people nearby laughed. Derek didn't. "The thing is, nobody knows where you came from. Nobody knows your story. You just showed up out of nowhere, and now you're working in our garage like you belong here." Claire's expression didn't change. "I'm just doing my job, Derek. Your job." He took one step closer. Funny thing about people who show up out of nowhere with no history and no explanation. In my experience, they're either running from something or hiding something. Sometimes both. Or sometimes they just need a job. Nah. He shook his head slowly like a man who had already decided the verdict. "I don't buy it." The room was getting quieter. People were turning to watch. Clare felt the shift, felt the attention pressing in from every direction. She recognized this feeling. She had felt it before in places far more dangerous than a biker clubhouse in Colorado. She kept her voice even. "Derek, I don't want any trouble." Nobody ever does, but trouble has a way of finding people who hide things. He stared at her for a long beat. His eyes dropped to her wrists, covered, as always, beneath long sleeves. "What are you hiding under there?" Claire's jaw tightened. It was the first visible reaction anyone had ever seen from her. "Nothing that concerns you. Everything in this clubhouse concerns me." Before she could respond, Derek reached out and grabbed her left arm. It happened fast. He yanked her sleeve up to the elbow, exposing the inside of her wrist for everyone in that room to see. A large, detailed rose tattoo. Deep reds and blacks winding from her wrist halfway up her forearm. Beautiful work. Intricate, clearly covering something underneath. Old scars, maybe? Or something else entirely. Derek held her arm up like a trophy. "Look at this," he said to the room. "Little Miss Quiet over here has a secret after all." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Some people looked uncomfortable, a few looked away, but nobody spoke up. Claire didn't pull her arm back. She didn't fight. She didn't shout. She stood completely still, looking straight ahead, her breathing slow and deliberate and controlled, like a woman who had learned, in much harder circumstances, how to stand inside a storm without being moved by it. And in the far corner of the room, Logan Carter set down his glass. Part 4. The Man Who Saw. Logan Carter was not the loudest man in the Hells Angels. He was not the biggest or the most feared. But he was, without question, the most respected. At 51, Logan had earned his place through decades of quiet reliability. He was the man people came to when they needed honest advice. He was the man who settled disputes without violence. In a world full of noise and chaos, Logan Carter was the still point. He chose his words the way a surgeon chooses instruments, deliberately, with intention, and only when necessary. He had spent 8 years in the military before he ever sat on a motorcycle. 2 tours overseas. Combat. Loss. The particular kind of damage that doesn't show on the surface but restructures everything underneath. When he came home, he had carried it all quietly, the way men of his generation were taught to carry things. Like weight was a virtue, like silence was strength. When Logan looked at Clare Morgan, he saw something he recognized. The way she moved through a room, the way she tracked exits, the way she stayed calm under pressure, the way she kept her past sealed behind a door she never opened. He saw someone who had been trained to survive. Not trained in any gym or classroom, trained by situations where the only alternative to survival was something you didn't come back from. When Derek grabbed Claire's arm and exposed her tattoo, Logan didn't react immediately. He watched. He waited. He measured the room the way a man measures a room when he's trying to understand what kind of problem he's actually dealing with. He saw Derek's aggression. He saw Claire's control. He saw the crowd choosing entertainment over decency, and he saw Claire's eyes. They weren't scared. They were calculating. She was assessing the room the way a professional assesses a threat, counting exits, measuring distances, identifying who was dangerous and who was just noise. Logan had seen that exact look before. In soldiers, in first responders, in people who had been through situations where panic meant death. He moved then, slowly, without rushing. He walked across the room and people stepped aside for him the way they always did, but for a completely different reason than why they stepped aside for Derek. Derek commanded space through fear. Logan commanded it through trust. He stopped next to Derek. "Let go of her arm, Derek." Derek turned, still holding Claire's wrist. "Stay out of this, Logan. I'm just having a little fun." "I said let go." The room went dead silent. Logan's voice hadn't risen. He hadn't raised his hand. He hadn't made a single threatening gesture. But something in his tone made it absolutely clear that this was not a request. It was not negotiable. And there was only one correct response. Derek held on for 3 more seconds. His jaw worked. His eyes moved between Logan and Claire. Then he released her arm and stepped back with his hands raised in a mocking surrender. "Fine. Whatever. She's your problem now." He grabbed his beer and walked away, but not before shooting Claire one last look over his shoulder. The kind of look that said, "This isn't over." Claire lowered her arm slowly and pulled her sleeve back down. For a moment, she and Logan stood side by side in the quiet center of that loud room. Then, Logan spoke, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You handled that well. I've had practice." "I can tell." Claire looked at him then, really looked at him, for the first time since she'd arrived. "You're military," she said. It wasn't a question. Logan's eyebrow lifted slightly. "What makes you say that?" "The way you moved through a crowd. The way you positioned yourself when you stepped up next to Derek. You put yourself between him and me, but at an angle where you could still see the rest of the room. That's not instinct, that's training." Logan studied her for a quiet moment. "And you know that because—" Claire didn't answer. She picked up her beer, took a slow sip, and said, "Thank you for stepping in. You didn't need me to. No, but it was decent of you anyway." She turned and walked toward the door. Logan watched her go. Marcus appeared at his shoulder a moment later. "So," Marcus said, "you know something about her." Logan picked up his glass again. "I know she's not what Derek thinks she is." "What is she?" Logan took a slow drink, set the glass down, stared at the door she had walked through. "Someone who's been through something none of us would survive." Marcus nodded once. He didn't ask anything else, and the two of them stood in that quiet corner of that loud room, both carrying the weight of a question they weren't ready to ask out loud. Part 5. What the Night Holds. Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small, rented room above the hardware store on Main Street, staring at the ceiling, pressing her right thumb against the rose tattoo on her left wrist. Underneath the ink, her fingertips could feel the ridges, the scar tissue that no amount of ink could fully erase. She closed her eyes, and she saw the face she always saw when the world got too quiet. A man's face, young, dark hair, kind eyes. The kind of eyes that made you feel like the room got a little warmer when they looked at you. Evan. His name still hit her like something physical. A weight in the center of her chest that never fully lifted, never eased, never let her breathe all the way in. She whispered it in the dark room, like a prayer she no longer believed in. "I'm sorry." 2 words she had said 1,000 times, 2 words that had never once changed anything. She turned on her side and pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. Tomorrow she would go back to the garage. She would fix engines. She would keep her head down. She would pretend that tonight hadn't happened. Because that was what Clare Morgan did. She survived. Not gracefully, not happily, just stubbornly, relentlessly, with a kind of quiet determination that looked like strength from the outside, but felt like exhaustion from within. She didn't know that Logan was awake too, sitting in his own kitchen 15 miles away, staring at a photograph he kept in a drawer, a squad photo from overseas. Men and women standing in front of a military helicopter in a sun-blasted landscape that could have been anywhere in the Middle East. Logan himself, third from the left, a younger version wearing Staff Sergeant insignia. And in the background of that photograph, partially hidden behind a taller man's shoulder, was a woman. Blonde hair pulled back tight, tool belt around her waist, hands smeared with grease, and the specific kind of competence that comes from doing something dangerous so many times, it stops feeling dangerous. Logan had looked at that photograph 100 times over the years. He had never noticed her. But tonight, after looking into Clare Morgan's eyes, he pulled it out again, and this time he saw her. He sat there in the dim kitchen light, holding the photograph between his fingers, and felt the floor shift underneath his understanding of everything. The woman in the background of a 12-year-old military photograph was the same woman who had just stood in a Hells Angels clubhouse and let a man humiliate her in front of 30 people rather than reveal who she really was. And Logan realized something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Clare Morgan wasn't hiding from trouble. She was hiding from grief. And the tattoo that Derek had mocked in front of the entire room wasn't a mark of rebellion or a badge of shame. It was a memorial for someone who died because Claire couldn't save them. Logan put the photograph down on the table. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in a very long time, Logan Carter didn't know what to do. Part 6. The Work That Heals. The next morning, Claire was the first one at the garage. Bay door open, coffee brewing. A shovel had already torn halfway down before anyone else arrived. Travis walked in at 6:15 and stopped cold. "You've been here since 5. "Couldn't sleep. Bad night." Claire tightened a bolt without looking up. "Something like that." Travis set down his things and went to his own bay. He glanced at her a few times, trying to read her, trying to understand the woman who could diagnose an engine by sound, but couldn't seem to hold a conversation longer than 4 sentences. At 7, Hank arrived. He walked through the garage, nodded at Claire, and stopped at the shovel head. "That thing's been sitting 6 weeks. It'll be running by noon. What was wrong with it? Primary chain tensioner was shot. Compensator nut backed out. Somebody put the wrong gasket on the primary cover, and it was leaking oil into the stator housing." Hank blinked. "You figured all that out this morning. I figured it out last week. Just didn't have time until now." Hank looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly with something that might have been admiration trying to find its way out through 30 years of hard-built reserve. "You're something else, Morgan. I'm just a mechanic." "No," Hank said quietly, "you're not." He walked away before she could respond. Claire watched him go, and for a moment, just a single, unguarded moment, she felt something loosen in her chest. A tiny crack in the wall she had spent 4 years building around herself. She pushed it away immediately. Feelings were dangerous. Connection was dangerous. The last time she had let someone truly in, she lost them. She was not going to make that mistake again. But Red Creek had other plans. Over the following weeks, things began to shift in ways Claire couldn't control. Marcus started leaving coffee on her workbench in the mornings. Black, no sugar, exactly the way she took it. He never made a thing of it. He just set it there and walked away like it was the most natural gesture in the world. Travis started asking questions. Not about her past. He had learned quickly not to go there. But about mechanics, about engines, about the way she diagnosed problems that stumped everyone else. "Teach me," he said one afternoon, standing over a V-twin that was misfiring intermittently. Claire looked at him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I've been doing this 3 years, and I'm not half as good as you. I want to know what you know." Something shifted in Claire's face, a flicker of something warm that she immediately tried to smother. "All right, come here." She spent the next 2 hours teaching Travis how to read an engine. Not with diagnostic tools, not with computers, with his hands and his ears. "Close your eyes," she said. "Feel the vibration through the frame. Every engine has a heartbeat. When something's wrong, the heartbeat changes. You don't need a computer to tell you what your hands already know." Travis listened. He closed his eyes. He placed his palms flat against the engine housing. And for the first time, he felt it. A slight hesitation in the rhythm. A tiny catch repeating every 4th cycle. "There," he said, his eyes snapping open. "Something's off in the timing." Claire nodded. "Intake valve clearance is too tight. It's hanging open a fraction too long. That's your misfire." Travis stared at her. "How do you do that? Years of listening to things that are broken." The way she said it made Travis understand she wasn't only talking about engines. He didn't push it. He just said, "Thanks, Claire, don't mention it." But from that day forward, Travis became something Claire hadn't planned for. A friend. Not a close one, not someone she can fight it in, but someone who showed up, asked honest questions, and treated her like a human being instead of a mystery to be solved. And Claire, who had spent 4 years making sure nobody got close enough to matter, found that she didn't hate it. Part 7. The Storm Building. Derek was a different story entirely. After the incident at the clubhouse, he didn't confront Claire directly again. Logan's intervention had made a public statement, and Derek wasn't stupid enough to challenge Logan Carter in the open. But Derek had other ways. He started talking. Quiet conversations at the bar. Sidelong comments dropped into the ears of people who were already inclined to be suspicious. Little seeds of doubt planted carefully and watered with implication. She's hiding something. Nobody shows up out of nowhere without a reason. You see that tattoo, something's underneath it. She's trouble. Mark my words. The rumors spread the way rumors always spread, slowly at first, then all at once. Some members started keeping their distance from Clare. Others gave her sideways looks when she walked into the clubhouse. A few stopped bringing their bikes to her bay entirely. Clare noticed. She always noticed. But she said nothing. She did nothing. She just kept working, kept showing up. Kept being the best mechanic in that garage by a margin that wasn't close. Because Clare knew something about rumors that most people didn't. They only have power if you fight them. The moment you start defending yourself, you confirm that there's something worth defending against. So she stayed quiet. She stayed steady. She let the noise wash over her like rain. But underneath that calm exterior, something was building. A pressure she recognized from years of carrying weight no one could see. The feeling of walls closing in. The feeling of a place that was starting to feel like home, becoming another place she would have to leave. And Clare Morgan was so tired of leaving. The turning point came on a Wednesday night. Clare was alone in the garage. Late. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. The only sounds were the clink of her tools and the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. She was deep in a repair when she heard a footstep behind her. She didn't turn around. She didn't tense. But her hand moved slowly naturally to the heavy wrench on the bench beside her. "It's me." Logan's voice. Clare's hand relaxed. "You shouldn't sneak up on people." "I didn't sneak. You were just paying attention." "Same thing." Logan walked into the light. He was carrying 2 bottles of beer. He held one out toward her. "Peace offering. Just a beer." She took it. They both leaned against the workbench side by side, not looking at each other. The kind of silence that happens between two people who are circling something neither one has said yet. Then Logan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the photograph. He held it out. Clare took it. She looked at it, and all the color drained from her face. The squad photo. 12 years old, men and women in front of a helicopter, and there in the background, partially hidden behind another figure, a young woman with blonde hair and grease-stained hands. Clare's hands began to tremble. She couldn't speak for a long moment, couldn't find the words or the breath to carry them. "Where did you get this?" she finally whispered. "I was there," Logan said quietly. "Third from the left. Staff Sergeant 1st Battalion. We were staging out of that base that whole year." Clare stared at the photograph. Her thumb brushed across the face of the man standing next to her younger self. Dark hair, kind eyes, smiling like the sun was personal. "Evan, you knew him." Clare's voice cracked for the first time since she had arrived in Red Creek. "I didn't know him. Not at first. But after the other night, the way you moved, the way you read the room, the way you controlled yourself when Derek grabbed you, I started remembering. And then I found the photo." Clare pressed the photograph against her chest. Her eyes closed. Her jaw was tight, every muscle in her body working to hold together what was threatening to come apart. "Please don't tell them," she said. "Tell them what? Any of it." Logan looked at her. "Clare, what happened to you isn't something to be ashamed of. I'm not ashamed." Her voice broke again. "I'm tired, Logan. I'm so tired of being the woman who survived when someone else didn't. I'm tired of people looking at me and seeing a tragedy. I came here because nobody here knows. Nobody sees a story when they look at me. They just see a mechanic. And that's all I want to be." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you let Derek humiliate you? Because fighting back would have shown them who you really are?" "I didn't let him humiliate me. I chose not to break his wrist. There's a difference." The way she said it, flat and certain, without a trace of exaggeration, made Logan believe her completely. He nodded slowly. "Your secret's safe with me. Thank you. But Clare, sooner or later, this place is going to ask you for more than just fixing engines. And when that happens, you're going to have to decide whether you trust these people enough to tell them the truth yourself." Clare handed the photograph back to him. "I haven't trusted anyone with the truth in 4 years. Maybe it's time. Maybe." She finished her beer in silence. Then she set the bottle down, picked up her tools, and went back to cleaning her bay. Logan watched her for a moment. Then he tucked the photograph into his jacket and walked toward the door. He stopped halfway. "Claire, yeah? The man in that photograph, the one standing next to you." Claire's hands went still. "His name was Evan," she said quietly. "What happened to him?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing Logan had ever heard. Claire's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "I couldn't save him." 3 words, just 3 words, but they carried the weight of 4 years of road, 4 years of garages and new towns, and no mail, and no home, and no letting anyone get close enough to see the truth. Logan nodded once. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't try to fix it. He simply said, "He'd be proud of the woman you became." And then he walked out into the Colorado night. Claire stood alone in the empty garage, her hands pressed flat against the workbench, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with the kind of silent grief that doesn't make a sound because it has been carried so long it has forgotten how to scream. The rose tattoo on her wrist seemed to pulse under the fluorescent lights. A memorial, a promise, a wound that would never fully heal but had taught her how to keep going anyway. Outside, the Colorado night was cold and clear and full of stars that didn't concern themselves with the pain of the people below them. And somewhere in that darkness a storm was building. One that would force Clare Morgan to become the person she had spent 4 years trying to forget, whether she was ready or not. Part 8. The Iron Wolves. 3 days passed after that night in the garage, and Logan didn't bring it up again. He didn't treat Claire differently. He didn't hover. He didn't check on her like she was something breakable. He simply went back to being the quiet, steady presence he had always been. And Claire was grateful for that, in a way she couldn't put into words. But something had shifted between them. Subtle. A nod across the room that lasted half a second longer than before. Coffee left on her workbench with the lid sealed tight. Logan's habit, not Marcus's. A silence between them that no longer felt like distance, but like understanding. Claire didn't trust it. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But trusting people had cost her everything once before, and the debt was still unpaid. So she buried herself in work. That week, Hank brought in a 1972 shovelhead belonging to a retired member named Dale Hutchkins. Dale was 73 years old, had been riding that same bike for 41 years, and loved it more than most men love their houses. The engine had seized during a ride 3 months back. 2 different shops had already told Dale the bike was finished. "Do what you can," Hank told Claire, "but don't make promises." Dale's heart can't take another disappointment. Claire spent 2 full days on that shovelhead. She pulled the engine apart piece by piece, cataloged every component, cleaned every surface, measured every tolerance. Travis watched her work from his bay, fascinated by the precision of her hands, the patience she brought to something everyone else had already given up on. "You're treating it like surgery," he said. "It is surgery. It's a motorcycle, Claire. It's 41 years of someone's life. That makes it more than a motorcycle." Travis shut up after that. On the 3rd day, Claire found what she had been looking for, a hairline crack in the crankcase, invisible unless you knew to pressure test the case itself. The 2 shops before had checked the obvious things: pistons, rings, valves. Nobody had thought to look deeper. Claire welded the crack using a technique she had learned from a man whose name she never spoke aloud anymore. She reinforced the repair, reassembled the engine, and on Thursday morning she turned the key. The shovelhead fired on the first kick. The sound rolled through the garage like a heartbeat coming back to life. Hank came running from the office. Travis dropped what he was holding. Even the mechanics in the far bay, men who had never said 2 words to Claire, stopped and turned and stared. "That's impossible," Hank said. 2 shops said that engine was dead. They were wrong. Hank stared at the running bike. Then he looked at Claire with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not admiration, something deeper, something closer to awe. He picked up the phone and called Dale. Dale Hutchkins arrived 40 minutes later. He walked into the garage slowly, leaning on a cane, his face tight with the kind of guarded hope that only comes from being disappointed enough times to learn the cost of hoping. When he heard his shovelhead running, he stopped walking. His hand went to his chest, his eyes filled. He didn't speak for almost a full minute. He just stood there listening to the engine, his lips pressed together, his chin trembling. Then he looked at Claire. "Who are you, honey?" "Just the mechanic." "Just the mechanic," No Dale said, and his voice cracked on the word. "No, you ain't just anything. My wife bought me that bike, 1983. She's been gone 11 years. That bike is all I've got left of her." Claire's hand tightened on the wrench she was holding. She knew exactly what it meant to hold on to something because it was the last thread connecting you to someone you lost. "She's running strong," Claire said softly. "She's got a lot of miles left." Dale reached out and took both of Claire's hands in his. His grip was weak, but his intention was fierce. "Thank you. You hear me? Thank you." Claire nodded. She didn't trust her voice. Dale turned to Hank. "You keep this woman. Whatever it takes, you keep her." After Dale left, the garage went quiet for a long time. Travis walked over to Claire's bay. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine, Claire." "I'm fine, Travis." He raised his hands and backed off. But before he returned to his own work, he looked at her one more time. And what he saw on her face wasn't the composure she wanted him to see. It was the look of a woman who had just been reminded why she used to do what she did, and why she stopped. Word about the shovelhead spread fast. Within a week, 3 more members brought bikes to Claire that other shops had surrendered on. She fixed every single one. An electrical gremlin on a 96 Electroglide. A transmission rebuild that supposedly required full replacement. A fuel injection problem on a newer road glide that the dealership itself couldn't diagnose. Each repair built her reputation a little higher. Each repair made Derek a little angrier, because every bike Claire fixed was one more bike proving him wrong. Every member who thanked her was one more person who stopped listening to his whispers. And Derek Hayes was not a man who handled being wrong with anything resembling grace. He cornered Travis one afternoon behind the garage. "What do you know about her?" Travis looked uncomfortable. "She's a good mechanic, Derek." "I didn't ask if she was good. I asked what you know about her." "Nothing. She doesn't talk about herself." "Exactly. Don't that bother you?" "No, it don't." Derek stepped closer. "You're getting soft, kid. She's got you running errands and asking questions like a puppy. Open your eyes. Nobody's that good without a history. Nobody hides their past unless their past is ugly." Travis straightened. Something hardened in his face. "Derek, I'm going to say something and I want you to hear it. Clare Morgan has done more for this garage in 2 months than you've done in 5 years. Every bike she touches runs better. Every person she helps comes back grateful. And you, all you do is stand in corners and talk about her behind her back? So maybe the person with the ugly history here isn't her." Derek's face went red. His fists clenched. His neck muscles tightened. For a moment, Travis genuinely thought he was about to get hit. Then footsteps. Hank walked around the corner. "Everything all right out here?" Derek forced a smile. "Just talking shop." "Good. Travis, I need you inside." Travis walked away without looking back at Derek. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking, but he didn't regret a single word. Derek stood alone behind the garage, breathing hard. Something was shifting in the clubhouse, and he could feel it, like a change in the weather before the storm arrives. The balance of respect that had always tilted in his direction was moving slowly and steadily toward a woman who hadn't asked for any of it. Derek pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Ray, it's Derek. I need you to look into somebody for me." That phone call would change everything, but not in the way Derek expected. Part 9. Something riding in from the east. While the tension inside the chapter was simmering, something else was riding toward Red Creek from outside. A rival motorcycle club called the Iron Wolves had been expanding their territory across Colorado for the past 18 months. They were aggressive, well-funded, and run by a man named Victor Salinas, a man with a reputation for taking what he wanted through a careful combination of intimidation and precision violence. The Iron Wolves had already absorbed 2 smaller clubs in neighboring counties. They had taken over bar territories and business operations that other clubs had held for decades. And now, they were looking at Red Creek. The first sign came on a Saturday morning. Marcus was riding alone on Route 9 when 2 bikes he didn't recognize pulled up behind him. They matched his speed for 3 miles, staying close, never passing. When Marcus pulled off at a gas station, they kept going. But not before one of them turned his head and stared at Marcus's cut with a look that was unmistakable. They were scouting, Marcus told Logan that afternoon. Iron Wolves, 2 of them riding the highway like they owned it. Logan's jaw tightened. How close to town? 8 miles out. That's too close. I know. Logan called an informal meeting that evening, senior members he trusted. Marcus, Hank, a road captain named Big John, and a few others. Claire wasn't invited. She wasn't a member, she was staff. But she was in the garage when they gathered in the back room. And the walls were thin enough that she heard enough to understand exactly what was happening. She heard the name Iron Wolves. She heard the word territory. She heard the tension in Logan's voice when he said, "We need to be smart about this," and she felt something cold settle into her stomach. The feeling she had spent 4 years running from. The feeling of danger approaching. The feeling of people she had come to care about walking towards something they didn't fully understand. She put down her tools and pressed her palms flat against the workbench, breathing slowly. Fighting the wave of memory that crashed over her without warning. A road in eastern Turkey, dust in the air, radio chatter. Evan's voice saying something's wrong, pull back. And then the sound that ended everything. Claire gripped the edge of the workbench until her knuckles went white. "Not again," she whispered. "Not again." But the universe doesn't much concern itself with what we whisper in empty rooms. 2 days later, the Iron Wolves made their first real move. They walked into a bar on the outskirts of Red Creek called the Rusty Nail, a place the Hells Angels had been using for events for over 15 years. 3 Iron Wolves told the owner he was under new management, and when he refused, they broke every bottle behind the bar. The owner called Hank. They said they'd be back Friday. They said if they see a Hells Angels cut in my bar again, they'll burn it down. Hank called Logan. Logan called church. This time, every member of the Red Creek chapter showed up. The room was packed. The air was hot, tempers already running before anyone said a word. Derek was the first to stand. "We ride Friday, all of us. We show up at the Rusty Nail, and if those Iron Wolves come back, we bury them." Several members shouted agreement. Fists hit tables. Logan let the noise run for 10 seconds. Then he raised one hand. Silence. "Sit down, Derek. Logan, we can't let this slide. They hit our bar. They threatened our people. I said sit down." Derek sat. His face was a thunderstorm contained in a frame. Logan stood slowly. He looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes in it. "I hear you, all of you. And I'm not saying we don't respond. I'm saying we don't respond stupid. Victor Salinas wants us at that bar Friday night. He wants us angry and outnumbered and walking right into his setup. If we do exactly what he expects, we lose. So what do we do?" Big John asked from the back. "We get smart. We find out how many men he's got, where they're staged, and what his real play is. Because this isn't about one bar. If Salinas is moving on Red Creek, he has a plan. And we need to know what that plan is before we walk into it." Derek leaned forward. "While we're playing detective, they're taking our territory." "One bar isn't territory, Derek. It's bait." The room split. Half the members agreed with Logan, the other half wanted blood. The meeting ended without a clear decision, and in the Hells Angels, a decision delayed often meant a decision made by default. Claire heard about the meeting from Travis the next morning. He told her everything. The Iron Wolves, the Rusty Nail, the argument, the split in the chapter. Claire listened without interrupting. When Travis finished, she asked one question. "How many Iron Wolves?" Nobody knows for sure. Maybe 30, 40. And they sent 3 guys to hit a bar, yeah. Claire shook her head slowly. What Travis asked. 3 guys. You send 3 guys when you want to send a message, not when you want to win a fight. If Salinas had 40 men and wanted the rusty nail, he'd have taken it. He sent 3 because he wanted the Hells Angels to react. He wanted you angry. He wanted you to show up Friday. Travis stared at her. How do you know that? Because it's a basic provocation tactic. You draw your enemy into a position you have already prepared. Then you hit them where they're not. Where they're not. What does that mean? Claire's voice dropped. It means while everyone's at the rusty nail waiting for a fight, Salinas is going to hit something else. Something more valuable. Travis felt a chill move through him. Like what Claire looked at him. What's the most valuable thing the chapter has? Travis thought for a moment, then his face went pale. The garage, all the bikes, all the records, all the tools. And where will every single member be Friday night? Travis turned and ran for the door. Travis. He stopped. Tell Logan. Only Logan. Why not everyone? Because if Derek finds out, he'll still want to ride to the bar. And then you lose both. Travis nodded once and left. 20 minutes later, Logan walked into the garage. He found Claire working. He crouched down next to the bike so he could see her face. Travis told me what you said. I think you're right. I know I'm right. Logan studied her. You've seen this before. It wasn't a question. Claire slid out from under the bike and sat up, wiping her hands on a rag. Logan, I've seen men die because they walked into exactly this kind of setup. 3 guys make noise at the front door. Everybody turns to face the noise. Nobody watches the back. Who were you, Claire? Before Red Creek? Before the garage? Who were you, really? Claire held his gaze. The weight of the question sat between them like something solid. I was someone who knew how to keep people alive, she said. And I failed. And now I fix motorcycles. Logan was quiet for a long moment. What if I asked you to do more than fix motorcycles? Just this once. I'd say you don't know what you're asking, maybe not, but I know what's at stake. I've got 26 members who are about to walk into a trap, and the only person who sees it clearly is someone who won't even tell me her last job title. Claire stood up. She was trembling, not with fear, with something older and deeper. With the memory of the last time someone asked her to step up, and what that had cost. Logan. The last time I did this, I lost someone. I know, if I do this and something goes wrong, then we face it together. That's the difference between what happened to you before and what's happening now. You weren't alone then either. But you thought you had to be. You don't have to be alone this time. Claire pressed her thumb hard into the rose tattoo on her wrist, like she was trying to feel the scars underneath through the ink. She closed her eyes. Evan's face, his voice. Something's wrong. Pull back. She opened her eyes. Okay, 1 word. That was all she gave him. But Logan heard a lifetime behind it. He nodded. What do we do? Claire took a breath, and for the first time in 4 years, the part of herself she had shut down and sealed away roared back to life. The part that calculated risk, mapped threats, made plans, kept people alive. First, we confirm the trap. Send 2 riders past the rusty nail, not members, people you trust to watch and report back. If Salinas is setting up, there'll be vehicles staged within a mile. Done. Second, we don't cancel Friday. We let Derek and the others think the plan is still on. If Salinas has eyes in town, and he does, he needs to believe we're taking the bait. You want to use our own guys as decoys? I want to split the group. Half go to the rusty nail. Visible. Loud. Exactly what Salinas expects. The other half your best people, the ones who can keep their mouths shut. They stay behind to protect the garage and the clubhouse. Derek will want to be at the bar. Good. Let him. He's loud and visible. That's exactly what we need him to be. Logan almost smiled. You're using Derek. I'm deploying an asset. There's a difference. This time Logan did smile. For half a second. Then it was gone. What about you? I'll be at the garage. Not alone. Put Marcus with me. And Travis. Travis is 24 years old. Travis listens. That's more valuable than muscle right now. Logan nodded slowly. He was watching her the way you watch something you haven't fully understood until this exact moment. Like a picture coming into focus that you'd been looking at sideways for months. Claire, when this is over, if we get through this, I think it's time the chapter knew the truth about you. Claire's face tightened, one thing at a time. Fair enough. He turned to leave, then stopped. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when everyone's still standing. Logan walked out. Claire stood alone in the garage, her heart hammering, her hands completely steady. The contradiction of Clare Morgan in a single moment. A heart full of terror, hands that never shook. She had promised herself she would never fight again. The ghost of Evan sat in the empty corner of the garage and watched her work. And if that ghost could speak, it would have said what Logan had already told her. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing. Part 10. Friday night. Thursday came with confirmation. The 2 riders Logan sent to scout the rusty nail came back with exactly what Claire had predicted. 2 trucks behind the tree line half a mile east of the bar. Big ones, the kind that transport motorcycles, and at least 8 men in a motel off Route 14 wearing Iron Wolves cuts and not even trying to hide it. They're not hiding because they don't think you're smart enough to look, Claire said when Logan relayed the report. That's their weakness, arrogance. Logan turned back to the scouts. How many total? At least 20, maybe more. Marcus, who had been quiet, spoke up. 20 against our 26. Those aren't bad odds. They're terrible odds, Claire said. Everyone looked at her. If Salinas brought 20 men for the front, he's got another team for the real target. You're not facing 20. You're facing 35, maybe 40, split across 2 locations. Big John rubbed his face. How do you know all this? Claire didn't answer. Logan answered for her. She knows. That's enough. Big John looked at Logan. He looked at Claire. He made a decision in that moment to trust the man he had trusted for 20 years. And by extension, the woman Logan trusted. All right. What's the plan? Claire laid it out simple, clean, no wasted words. 16 members ride to the Rusty Nail, visible loud arriving at 8 p.m., park out front. Go inside, order drinks, act like they're ready for war. 10 members stay behind, split between the garage and the clubhouse. Dark, quiet, waiting. If Salinas' second team shows up at the garage, they'll expect it to be empty. They'll be careless. That's when you stop them. Not with a fight. Block the exits, turn on every light in the building, let them understand they've been made. 35 men across 2 locations means neither group is strong enough to win alone. Once the garage team realizes they've walked into a setup, Salinas loses his leverage. Once he loses leverage, the bar team folds. You're betting a lot on the idea that they won't fight, Marcus said. I'm betting on the fact that Victor Salinas is a businessman, not a soldier. He doesn't want a war. He wants to break your spirit. If you show him you can't be broken, he'll go find easier prey. Marcus looked at her with something between admiration and sadness. You've done this before, he said softly. Yes. Did it work? Claire's voice dropped. The plan worked, but I lost someone I couldn't afford to lose. The room was silent. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we make sure that doesn't happen this time. Claire looked at him, and for the first time since she walked into Red Creek, Colorado, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. She felt like she wasn't carrying the weight alone. Friday arrived like a held breath. The day moved slowly. Claire worked in the garage, her attention split between the engine in front of her and every sound outside the bay door. Every set of headlights on the highway cataloged and filed. Her body was in Red Creek. Her mind was already inside the operation, running contingencies, checking variables, preparing for the moment when everything would either hold together or fall apart. At 6 p.m., the chapter began gathering. Derek was among the first to arrive. He was charged with energy pacing, talking loud, slapping people on the back. This was the Derek who thrived on confrontation, the version of himself he liked best. He walked past Claire without a word, but his eyes flicked toward her and she saw the question in them. Why is she still here? Logan gathered the full group at 7. He split them exactly as Claire had planned, 16 for the rusty nail, 10 staying back. Derek was in the first group, just as Claire had known he would be. I want to be where the action is, Derek said. That's exactly where you'll be, Logan replied. Derek grinned. He had no idea that he had just been positioned precisely and deliberately by a woman he had spent 2 months trying to destroy. At 7:30, the 16 riders fired their engines and rolled out. The sound shook the ground. Headlights cut through the fading light as they turned onto Route 9 and disappeared east. The garage went quiet. Claire stood in the bay door and watched them go. Marcus appeared beside her. You ready for this, Claire? His hand drifted to the rose on her wrist. No, she said, but I wasn't ready last time either. What happened last time? Claire turned to look at him. Her eyes were calm, her voice was steady, but underneath Marcus could see the fault line, the crack running through the center of everything she was. Last time she said I told someone to pull back. He didn't listen, and I held him while he died on a road in a country that didn't know his name. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something in his expression went beyond sympathy. It was solidarity. The look of a man who had buried people too, and who understood that some wounds don't close, they just stop bleeding. He listened to you, Marcus said quietly. He just ran out of time. Claire said nothing, but she heard him. And somewhere deep inside the fortress she had built around her heart, a single stone came loose and fell. At 9:14 p.m., headlights appeared on the road east of the garage. Not motorcycles, trucks, 2 of them, moving slow, lights off. Travis spotted them from the office window above the garage, binoculars in hand exactly where Claire had told him to be. He came down the stairs fast. 2 trucks coming from the east, half a mile out, no headlights. Claire's breathing changed. Her pulse slowed. Her vision narrowed. This was the version of Clare Morgan that nobody in Red Creek had ever seen. The version that didn't panic. The version that calculated distance and time and threat level with the precision of someone who had been forged in the worst moments a human being could survive. Everyone in position, she said. Her voice was low even, and carried an authority that made every man in that garage move without a single question. Marcus went to the rear entrance. 3 members covered the side doors, 2 more positioned to any end of the parking area. Travis stayed with Claire at the main bay. When they come in, Claire said, they'll come through the bay door, widest access point. Most direct route to the bikes. They'll expect the building to be dark and empty. We let them get inside, we let them commit, and then we light them up. Light them up. Travis's eyes went wide. The lights, Travis. We turn on every light in this building. And we let them see exactly how badly they miscalculated. Travis exhaled. Right. Lights. Got it. Claire looked at him. You're going to be fine. You don't know that. No, but I know you're braver than you think. I've seen it. Travis swallowed hard and nodded. The truck stopped 200 yards from the garage. Engines cut, doors opened. Claire counted the shadows moving in the dark. 8, 9, 10, 11 men, spreading out and moving on foot. She was right. Salinas had split his force. 11 men moving toward the garage like they owned the night. Moving with the confidence of people who believe they're walking into an empty building. Moving carelessly. That was their mistake. Claire's hand rested on the light switch. She waited. The first shadow reached the bay door. She waited. 2 more slipped inside. She waited. 5 of them through. 6, 7, moving toward the rows of motorcycles, reaching for tools, for gas cans, for destruction. Claire counted to 3 in her head and threw the switch. Every light in the garage blazed on at once, Fluorescent tubes, work lamps, overhead floods. The entire building went from pitch black to blinding white in a single heartbeat. The 11 men froze. And they saw 10 Hell's Angels standing around them in a circle. Arms crossed, faces stone. Marcus stepped forward from the rear. "Gentlemen, you seem lost." Not a single Iron Wolf moved, because they understood in that terrible, bright moment, they had walked into the exact trap they thought they were setting. Claire stood by the light switch, her face expressionless, her heart slamming in her chest. It had worked. The plan had worked. Then her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from Logan, 2 words. Bars clear. The Iron Wolves at the Rusty Nail had taken one look at 16 Hell's Angels walking calmly through the front door, and vanished into the night without a single punch being thrown. Salinas had gambled on fear and disorganization. He got neither. And the woman who made it all possible was standing in a motorcycle garage in Red Creek, Colorado, pressing her thumb against a rose tattoo, whispering a name that only the dead could hear. "We did it, Evan." No one heard her say it, but she said it anyway, because some conversations are not for the living. Part 11. The truth behind the tattoo. The 11 Iron Wolves stood frozen under the blinding lights for what felt like an eternity, but was probably 12 seconds. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent tubes and the breathing of 21 men and 1 woman who had just rewritten the outcome of a confrontation without throwing a single punch. Then the leader of the 11, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a sergeant-at-arms patch on his cut, did something nobody expected. He laughed. Not nervous, not threatening. A genuine, exhausted, caught red-handed laugh of a man who fully understood what had just happened to him. "Well," he said, looking around at the circle of Hell's Angels surrounding him, "I guess we're the idiots tonight." Marcus didn't smile. "You came into our house." "Yeah, we did. You came to burn it." The man hesitated. Then he nodded. "Those were the orders." "Whose orders?" "You know whose." Marcus took one step closer. "I want to hear you say it." "Victor Salinas." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Marcus looked at Claire. She gave him the smallest nod, almost invisible, but Marcus caught it. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said. "You're going to get back in those trucks. You're going to drive east. And you're going to tell Victor Salinas that Red Creek is not what he thought it was. And if he doesn't listen, tell him to come himself next time, and bring more than 11 men." The Iron Wolf held Marcus's gaze for a long moment. Something passed between them. Not respect exactly, but acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of one experienced person recognizing another across a line neither of them had drawn. "Fair enough," the man said. He turned to his crew. "Let's go." They walked out single file. Nobody ran. Nobody looked back. The trucks started. Headlights came on. And then they were gone, swallowed by the dark road heading east. The garage exhaled. Travis sat down on an overturned bucket and put his head in his hands. "Holy hell," he whispered. "Holy hell." Marcus walked over to Claire. He stood in front of her and looked at her for a long, full moment. "You just saved this chapter," he said. "The chapter saved itself. I just turned on some lights." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Shrink yourself. You planned this. You saw what nobody else could see. You don't get to pretend that was nothing." Claire's composure cracked for just a fraction of a second. Her lower lip trembled. Her eyes went glassy. Then she pulled it back, sealed the crack, rebuilt what had opened. "Call Logan," she said. "Tell him it's done." Marcus pulled out his phone, but before he dialed, he put his hand on Claire's shoulder. Just for a moment, just long enough to say without words what words couldn't carry. Then he stepped away and made the call. Claire leaned against the workbench and closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking now. Not during, never during, but always after. That was the cruelest part of being who she was. In the moment of crisis, she was ice. The moment the crisis passed, the ice melted, and everything underneath came flooding up. She pressed her palms together and squeezed until the trembling stopped. Travis appeared beside her. "Claire, yeah, that was the most terrifying and the most incredible thing I have ever been part of." "Go home, Travis. Get some sleep. Are you okay?" She opened her eyes and looked at him. This kid, 24 years old, scared completely out of his mind, who had stood exactly where she told him to stand and hadn't moved when every instinct was screaming at him to run. "You did good tonight," she said. Travis's face changed. Something settled in him. A quiet pride that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with discovering that he was braver than he had believed himself to be. "Thanks, Claire." He left. One by one, the others cleared out. Nods, handshakes, looks thrown in Claire's direction that carried a weight they hadn't carried 24 hours ago. Then the garage was empty. Just Claire, standing alone in the bright, humming silence. When Logan arrived 40 minutes later, he found her sitting on the floor next to the Road King she had fixed her first week. Her back against the lift, her eyes open but seeing something that wasn't in the room. He sat down next to her without a word. For a long time they just sat there, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Then Claire spoke. Evan was a flight medic. Logan didn't move. He barely breathed. He understood that what was happening right now was something that hadn't happened in 4 years. Clare Morgan was opening a door she had welded shut. "We work together on a rescue team," she said. "Civilian contract, but attached to military and humanitarian operations around the world. My job was to keep the equipment running. Generators, hydraulic rescue tools, vehicles, communication systems, whatever broke in the field, I made it work. That was my job. Keep the machines running so the medics could keep the people alive." Her voice was steady. Too steady. The steadiness of someone reciting facts to keep the feelings at arm's length. And Evan kept the people alive. He was the best I had ever seen. He could walk into a collapsed building with nothing but a first aid kit and come back out with 3 survivors that everyone else had given up on. He didn't know how to quit. He didn't know how to leave someone behind. She paused, her breathing changed. That's what killed him. Logan waited. He didn't push. He sat beside her and gave her the space to tell it in her own way, at her own pace. "We were in the mountains, eastern Turkey. A village had been hit by a landslide after 3 days of rain. Our team was called in to assist. We got there and it was bad. Worse than the reports. Half the village was buried. People still trapped under the debris." Claire's hand moved to her wrist. She gripped the tattooed skin like she was trying to hold on to something slipping away. "We worked 16 hours straight, pulled out 11 people. 11. I maintained the equipment. Kept the hydraulic rescue tools running, patched the generators when they failed. Evan was on the ground in the rubble doing what he did. Then one of the local responders told us there was a family trapped in a structure on the edge of the slide zone. A mother and 2 children. The structure was unstable. The whole section of hillside above it was saturated and could let go at any moment. Our team lead called it off, said it was too dangerous, ordered everyone to pull back." Claire's jaw clenched. Evan didn't pull back. Logan closed his eyes. He said he could hear them, the children. He said they were crying and he could hear them through the debris. He looked at me and said, "Claire, I can't leave them. You know I can't." Her voice broke on the last 3 words. Not dramatically, not loudly, it just cracked like a glass that has been holding too much weight for too long. I told him to wait. I told him I'd get the team lead to reconsider. I told him we could find another way in. But Evan was already moving. He was already climbing into that structure because that's who he was. He didn't calculate risk the way I did. He calculated lives. She stopped. She took 3 slow breaths. He got to the family. He got the mother out first. Passed her to me through an opening in the debris. Then he went back in for the children. Logan felt the weight of what was coming settle onto his chest. The second slide hit 17 seconds after he went back in. Silence. The kind of silence that swallows everything. Sound. Thought. Time itself. I heard it before I felt it, Claire said. A sound like the earth groaning. Then the ground moved. The whole structure collapsed inward. I was thrown back. When I got up, everything Evan had crawled into was just gone. Buried under 30 feet of mud and rock. Claire's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I dug for 9 hours with my bare hands after the tools failed, after the generator died, after everyone else stopped. I dug until my fingers were broken and my gloves were soaked with blood and I couldn't feel my arms anymore. We found the 2 children first. They were in a pocket he had created with his own body. He had curled himself around them and used his back to hold up a section of wall that should have crushed all 3 of them. The children were alive. Evan wasn't. Logan opened his eyes. He looked straight ahead because he knew that if he looked at Claire right now, she would stop talking. And she needed to finish. He died holding them. His arms were still around them when we pulled him out, and his face... Logan, his face was calm. Like he knew, like he had made the choice and he was at peace with it. And I hated him for that. She was crying now, silently. The tears running down her face without sound, without drama, without the release that crying is supposed to bring. These were tears that had been held back for 4 years, finally leaking through cracks in a dam that was giving way. The rose tattoo? Logan said softly. Claire nodded. She turned her wrist over and looked at it. I got it 6 months after he died. It covers the scars from digging. My hands healed, but the scars were ugly. And every time I looked at them, I didn't see courage. I saw failure. I saw the woman who couldn't convince the man she loved to wait 30 more seconds. Logan's head turned sharply. The man you loved. Claire wiped her face with the back of her hand. We never said it. We never had time. We were always in the next disaster, the next crisis, the next impossible situation. We told ourselves we'd figure it out later. There was always going to be a later. She laughed, a broken, bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. There wasn't a later. Logan reached over and took her hand. Not romantically, not with any agenda. He took her hand the way one soldier takes another's hand after a battle. To say, I'm here. I'm real. You survived. And surviving is not a sin. Claire gripped his hand until her knuckles turned white. I left the rescue service 3 months after Evan died, she said. Every time an alarm went off, every time a call came in, I froze. Not because I was scared, because I kept waiting to hear his voice on the radio, and it never came. So you drove. I drove across the country. Wyoming, Montana, Nevada. Wherever there was a garage that needed a mechanic and nobody asked questions. 3 months, maybe 4 in each place, then I'd leave, start over. Why Red Creek? Claire was quiet for a moment. I ran out of reasons to keep moving. She looked at Logan. And then I walked into a clubhouse full of people who judged me by a tattoo. And I thought, maybe this is the test. Maybe this is the place where I find out if I can stop running and still be standing. Logan squeezed her hand once, then let go. You're still standing, Claire. Barely. Doesn't that matter. Barely still counts. They sat in silence for a few more minutes. Then Logan got to his feet and offered her his hand. She took it. He pulled her up. They stood face to face. The chapter needs to know, Logan said. Claire's face tightened. Not everything, not tonight. But after what you did, after you saved this garage, after you outplanned Victor Salinas, after you proved that you see things nobody else can see, they're going to have questions. And they deserve some answers. They won't understand. Try them. And if they look at you and see a tragedy instead of a mechanic? Logan shook his head. Claire, they already see you differently. After tonight, every man in this chapter knows you're more than a mechanic. The question isn't whether they find out who you are. The question is whether you trust them enough to tell them yourself, or whether you let rumors and guesswork do it for you. That landed hard, because Derek was already digging. The phone call he'd made to someone named Ray was still out there, gathering information, building a picture of Claire that might be accurate in its facts, but would be completely wrong in its meaning. If Derek found the truth before Claire spoke it, He would control the narrative. He would turn her pain into a weapon, and her past into proof of everything he'd been saying since the day she arrived. When Claire asked, "Sunday, after church, I'll set it up. Logan, I haven't told anyone this story in 4 years. I nearly broke telling it to you just now." "I know, but you're not the same person you were 4 years ago. 4 years ago you were alone. Right now you've got Marcus and Travis and Hank and me. That's not nothing." Claire took a shaky breath. "Okay. Sunday." Logan nodded. He walked toward the door, then stopped. "Claire." "Yeah." "The children, the ones Evan saved. What about them? Did they make it?" Claire's face changed. Something broke through the grief. Something warm and fierce and unbreakable. They made it. A boy and a girl. The boy was 4, the girl was 6. I got a letter from their mother 2 years later. She named the boy Evan. Logan stood still for a long moment. He took a breath and let it out slow. Then he didn't fail. "And neither did you." He left. Claire stood alone in the garage. She looked down at the rose tattoo, and for the first time since she had it inked onto her skin, she didn't see failure. She saw a man who gave everything he had so 2 children could live. She saw a woman who carried his memory across a continent because she loved him too much to let it go. She saw a rose growing out of a scar, not hiding the wound, transforming it into something beautiful enough to carry forever. "Evan," she whispered. The name didn't hurt the way it used to. It still ached. It would always ache. But the sharp edge, the blade that cut her every time she said it, had worn down just enough for her to hold it without bleeding. That was enough for now. That was enough. Part 12. Sunday. Sunday morning came with the weight of a verdict. Claire dressed slowly in her small rented room. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at herself. Really looked for the first time in months. Tired eyes, lines around her mouth that hadn't been there 5 years ago, a scar along her jawline from a piece of debris in Turkey that she'd never gotten stitched properly, and the rose on her wrist reflected in the mirror upside down, like a different version of the same story, told from a different angle. "You can do this," she said to her reflection. Her reflection didn't look convinced. At noon, she walked into the Hells Angels clubhouse. The room was full, every member of the Red Creek chapter. 31 men, ranging in age from 24 to 73, sitting in folding chairs arranged in a rough semicircle. Coffee in some hands, beer in others, all of them watching her walk to the front. Logan stood near the front. He gave her a nod. Marcus was in the second row. He gave her something better. A look that said, "Whatever happens in this room, you are not alone in it." Derek was in the back corner, arms crossed, face unreadable. Claire turned to face them all. Her heart was hammering, her palms were damp, but her voice when she spoke was steady. "Most of you know me as the mechanic Hank hired 2 months ago. Some of you think I'm hiding something. Some of you think I'm trouble. One of you has been actively trying to find out who I am behind my back." She looked directly at Derek. He didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. "So I'm going to tell you myself, because you deserve to hear it from me, not from a phone call or a rumor or a background check." The room was completely still. Before I came to Red Creek, I was a technical rescue specialist. I worked with civilian emergency response teams contracted to military and humanitarian operations around the world. My job was to keep equipment running in disaster zones: generators, hydraulic rescue tools, vehicles, communication systems, so that medics and first responders could save lives. She let that settle. I was good at it, very good. I worked in earthquake zones, flood zones, conflict areas, and places that most people only see on the news for 10 seconds before changing the channel. I did it for 6 years. Then I lost my partner. Her voice held, but the effort it took was visible to anyone paying close attention. His name was Evan Hollister. He was a flight medic. He was the best person I have ever known. And he died in eastern Turkey 4 years ago, pulling 2 children out of a collapsed building. He saved their lives with his own body, and I couldn't save his. The room was so quiet, Claire could hear the clock on the wall. The tattoo on my wrist, the one some of you have been so curious about, covers the scars I got digging through rubble with my bare hands, trying to reach him. I dug for 9 hours. When they finally pulled me away, my fingers were broken and my gloves were soaked with blood. The scars healed ugly. I got the rose because I needed to see something beautiful when I looked at my hands, instead of something I failed at. Dale Hutchkins, 73 years old, made a small choked sound in the third row and didn't try very hard to cover it. After Evan died, I left the service. I couldn't function. Every emergency call, every siren, every time someone needed help, I froze. Not because I was afraid, because I kept expecting to hear his voice, and it never came. So I ran. I spent 4 years driving across this country, working in garages, keeping my head down, never staying long enough for anyone to know my name. And then I came here. She looked around the room. I didn't come to Red Creek to cause trouble. I came because I was tired of running. I came because Hank gave me a chance, and this garage gave me a purpose. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like I could breathe without choking on my own history. And then Friday night happened. She straightened her spine. Some of you know what I did. For those who don't, I am the one who figured out that the Iron Wolves' attack on the Rusty Nail was a diversion. I am the one who planned the split deployment. I am the one who identified the real target as this garage. And I am the one who was standing in this building when 11 Iron Wolves walked in expecting to destroy everything you've built and instead found themselves surrounded. I did that because it's what I was trained to do. Read the threat. Make a plan. Protect the people around me. That instinct doesn't disappear just because you stop wearing the uniform. It stays in your bones. She took a breath. So now you know. All of it. I'm not a criminal. I'm not hiding from the law. I'm not dangerous. At least, not in the way Derek thinks I am. I'm just a woman who lost someone, carried the weight of it alone for too long, and ended up in your garage because I didn't know where else to go. She stopped talking. The silence that followed was enormous. 31 men sitting in a room processing a story that none of them had expected, processing a woman who had just handed them the most valuable thing one human being can offer another: the truth. Dale was the first to stand. He rose, slowly leaning on his cane, his eyes red and unashamed. "That tattoo," he said, his voice rough. "That tattoo is the most beautiful damn thing I've ever heard of." He walked toward Claire. Nobody moved to stop him. He reached her, took both her hands in his, and held them with everything he had. "My wife's been gone 11 years. Every day I ride the bike she gave me because it's the only way I know how to carry her with me. You carry your man the same way. On your skin, in your hands, in every engine you touch." He squeezed her hands. "You ain't broken, sweetheart. You're the strongest person in this room." Claire's composure finally gave way. Not loudly, not dramatically. She simply bowed her head and the tears came, and she let them come. Because for the first time in 4 years, she was not crying alone. Marcus stood next, then Travis, then Hank, then Big John. One by one, men rose from their chairs and moved toward Claire. Not to pity her, not to comfort her in that hollow way that makes grief feel smaller than it is, but to stand with her, to close the distance, to say with their physical presence what their words couldn't reach. 26 of the 31 members were on their feet before Derek moved. He stayed in his chair, arms crossed, watching the room rearrange itself around the woman he had spent 2 months trying to destroy. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down at it, read the message from Ray, the investigator he had called. His face went white. The results of the background check on Clare Morgan. Clare Morgan, former technical rescue specialist, FEMA certified, contracted to NATO Joint Operations, 6 years of service. Commendation for bravery from the Department of Defense, commendation for distinguished service from the government of Turkey. Named in 2 international rescue reports as a critical team member whose actions directly resulted in the survival of over 40 people across multiple operations. And at the bottom, a footnote. Partner Evan Hollister killed in action during the Arvin Province landslide response. Two children ages 4 and 6 recovered alive due to Hollister's actions. The children's mother submitted a formal request to the United States government that both Hollister and Morgan be recognized for their sacrifice. The request was granted. Clare Morgan had a commendation from 2 governments and a dead partner whose name a Turkish family had given to their son. And Derek had spent 2 months mocking her tattoo. He sat in that chair with his phone in his hand and felt something he had not felt in 20 years of being the loudest man in every room. Shame. Not anger, not defensiveness, not the stubborn pride that had carried him through every confrontation. Shame. The deep, quiet, sickening kind that starts in the stomach and rises through the chest and settles behind the eyes like a headache that won't go away. He looked at Clare, standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by men who had chosen her over him. And he saw, truly saw for the first time, what he had done. He had taken a woman carrying more pain than he had ever known, and he had made it worse. He had grabbed her arm in front of 30 people and exposed a memorial to the man she loved. He had turned her grief into entertainment. He had whispered behind her back. He had tried to weaponize her past, and she had never once fought back. Not because she couldn't, because she was stronger than him. That realization hit Derek Hayes like something solid to the center of his chest. He stood up. The room noticed. Heads turned. Some faces hardened, expecting confrontation. Clare saw him rise. She straightened. Her eyes were still wet, but her gaze was direct and completely unflinching. Derek walked forward. The crowd parted the way it always did. But this time, the energy was different. This time, the room was making way for a man walking toward something he couldn't undo. He stopped 3 feet from Clare. For a long moment, he said nothing. His jaw worked. His hands opened and closed at his sides. "I don't know how to do this," he said. His voice was low, stripped of its usual performance, stripped of everything he used it for. Clare waited. "I spent my whole life believing I could size a person up in 10 seconds. Walk into a room, read the faces, know who was strong and who was weak. That was my skill, that was my value, and I was good at it." He swallowed. "I looked at you and I saw someone hiding, and in my world, hiding means weakness. Hiding means you've got something ugly you don't want people to see. So I pushed. I push because that's what I do. I push until the truth comes out and I can tell myself I was right." His voice cracked. "I wasn't right." The room held its breath. "I grabbed your arm in front of everyone. I held up your tattoo like it was evidence of something dirty. And the whole damn time, it was a memorial to a man who died saving children. And you were covering the scars you got trying to save him." Derek's eyes were red. Not crying, he wasn't the kind of man who let himself cry, but close. Closer than anyone in that room had ever seen him. I don't know how to apologize for that. I don't think there are words big enough. But I'm standing here because Logan told me that showing up is the first step, even when you don't know the second one. He looked at his hands. I spent 20 years in this club believing that strength meant being the loudest, the most aggressive, the most feared. And tonight I'm standing in front of a woman who has more strength in her silence than I've ever had in all my noise. He looked at Clare. "I'm sorry, I know that's not enough, but it's all I've got." Clare stood still for a long time. The room waited. She could have destroyed him. She had every right and every reason. She had the receipts, the commendations, the truth, and an audience of 30 people who were already on her side. She chose differently. "Derek, look at me." He looked. "I've spent 4 years hating myself for not being able to save someone I loved. I've spent 4 years believing that if I had been faster, smarter, louder, if I had grabbed his arm the way you grabbed mine and forced him to stop, he would still be alive." She took 1 step toward him. "Carrying that kind of guilt changes you. It makes you hard in places where you used to be soft. It makes you suspicious of kindness. It makes you push people away because you're terrified that if you let them close, you'll lose them too." She met his eyes. "You judge me by my cover, Derek." You saw the tattoo and the silence and the long sleeves and you wrote a story about me that wasn't true. But I've been doing the same thing. I looked at you and saw a bully. I wrote you off as someone who wasn't worth understanding." Derek flinched. "Maybe we both got it wrong," Claire said. "Maybe the lesson isn't that you misjudged me. Maybe the lesson is that none of us can see the whole story by looking at one page." She extended her hand. Derek stared at it, then he took it. Not a handshake, something rougher and more honest. He gripped her hand and held it, and in that grip was something neither of them had words for. The beginning of respect between two people who had started as enemies and were standing at the threshold of something neither could name yet. "I'm going to do better," Derek said. "So am I." He let go. He stepped back. He nodded once. Then he walked to the back of the room and sat down. And the Hells Angels clubhouse of Red Creek, Colorado, which had witnessed 1,000 fights and 1,000 grudges and 1,000 displays of force, had just witnessed something far rarer. Forgiveness. Not the easy kind. Not the kind that forgets. The kind that costs something. The kind that requires both people to admit they were carrying weight they didn't know how to put down. Logan moved to the front of the room. He looked at Claire. He looked at the chapter. "I think we all understand now what kind of person we have in this building," he said. "And I think we owe it to her to be the kind of people who deserve to have her here." He paused. Claire saved this chapter Friday night, not with violence, not with anger, with the same skills she used to save lives for 6 years across 3 continents. She saw a threat that none of us saw. She made a plan that none of us could have made. And she did it without asking for credit, without asking for a cut, without asking for a single thing in return. He looked directly at Claire. "I made you a promise a while back. I told you this could be a place where you didn't have to run anymore. I meant it. If you want to stay, this is your home. Not as an outsider, not as the hired mechanic, as one of us." Claire's chin trembled. She thought of Evan. She thought of the road. The endless, lonely, exhausting road she had been traveling for 4 years. She thought of the garage and the shovel head and Dale's tears and Travis's dumb questions and Marcus's coffee every morning and Logan's quiet, steady presence that had become the closest thing to safety she had known since the day Evan died. She thought of the rose on her wrist. "I'd like that," she said. The room broke into something that wasn't quite applause and wasn't quite a cheer. It was warmer than both. A sound of acceptance, of recognition, of a group of rough and broken and imperfect men deciding together in that moment that this woman belonged with them. Marcus appeared at her side. "Welcome home, Claire." She looked at him. For the first time since she walked into Red Creek, Colorado, she believed it. Dale Hutchkins was crying openly now and didn't care who saw. Travis was grinning so wide it looked like his face might not recover. Hank shook his head slowly and muttered something about best damn mechanic he ever hired. And in the back of the room, Derek Hayes sat alone with his phone in his hand, reading the message from Ray over and over, absorbing the full weight of how wrong he had been. Feeling for the first time the terrifying freedom of admitting it. Part 13. The Woman Who Found Home. 6 months changed everything and nothing at the same time. Clare Morgan still arrived at the garage before anyone else. She still brewed the coffee, still opened the bay doors, still had grease under her nails before the sun fully cleared the mountains. The routine hadn't changed, but the woman inside the routine was unrecognizable from the one who had walked into Red Creek with a duffel bag and a secret she thought would bury her. The first sign that Claire had truly stopped running came on a Tuesday in October when she signed a 12-month lease on a small house 2 miles from the garage. Travis found out before anyone else. "Wait, you got a house? Like a real house with a mailbox and everything?" "It has a mailbox, Travis. Clare Morgan has a mailing address." "This is historic. You're being dramatic. I'm being accurate. You've been living above a hardware store for 6 months. This is growth." Claire threw a shop rag at him. He caught it, grinning, and she realized with a small shock that she was grinning too. Not the controlled, almost smile she had perfected over 4 years, a real one. The kind that happened before she could stop it. That was happening more often now. Moments that snuck past her defenses, laughter that arrived without invitation. Connections that formed before she could build walls fast enough to stop them. It terrified her, and she let it terrify her. Because Logan had told her something one evening that she couldn't shake loose. Being scared of happiness isn't strength, Claire. It's just grief wearing a disguise. She hated that he was right. She hated it more that she needed to hear it. The garage became something different after the Iron Wolves night. Word spread through the wider community. Not the details, not Claire's role specifically, but the fact that the Red Creek chapter had outmaneuvered Victor Salinas without a single punch thrown. Other chapters called. Allies reached out. The reputation of the Red Creek Hells Angels, which had been quietly fading for years, roared back to life, and at the center of that revival, whether she wanted to be or not, was Claire. Hank made it official in November. He promoted her to lead mechanic, a title that had never been held by a woman in the history of the Red Creek chapter, or any chapter that anyone could remember. "You earned it," Hank said, handing her a new set of keys to the garage. "Don't let it go to your head." "When have I ever let anything go to my head? Never. That's why you earned it." The younger mechanics looked at her with something between admiration and awe. She was patient with them the way she had been patient with Travis, teaching them not just how to fix engines, but how to listen to them. "Every machine tells you what's wrong," she said during one training session. "You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. Most people aren't quiet. Most people are too busy thinking about what they want to say next to hear what's already being said. Engines aren't like people. They don't lie, they don't hide. They just need someone to pay attention." Travis, leaning against the wall and watching her teach, caught her eye and raised an eyebrow. She knew what he was thinking, that she wasn't only talking about engines. She looked away before he could see her smile. The phone calls with Turkey became a monthly ritual. Elif, now 19 and in her second year of medical school, called Claire on the first Sunday of every month. Her English had improved dramatically, and their conversations grew longer each time. "I told my professor about Evan today," Elif said during one call, "about what he did, about the pocket he made with his body. My professor said that is the definition of a field medic, someone who turns their own body into shelter. I want to be that kind of doctor, Claire. The kind who shelters people." Claire pressed the phone against her ear and breathed through the tightness in her chest. "You already are, Elif." And little Evan, who was not so little anymore at 16, and nearly 6 feet tall according to his mother, sent Claire photographs of motorcycles he was rebuilding. Old bikes salvaged from junkyards brought back to life with hands that moved the way Claire's moved. Aisha said he had a gift. Claire said he had something better than a gift. He had patience. "Patience is just love slowed down," Claire told Aisha during one of their calls. Aisha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is something Evan would have said. You are Evan." Claire closed her eyes. "Yeah, it is." The connection to Turkey did something Claire hadn't anticipated. It didn't just heal the wound, it gave the wound meaning. For 4 years she had carried Evan's death as proof of her failure. Now, every phone call, every photograph, every update on Elif's studies and little Evan's mechanical projects transformed that proof into something else entirely. Evidence of continuation. Evan Hollister didn't die for nothing. He died for everything that came after. The doctor who would save lives in his name. The young mechanic whose hands carried his instinct. The mother who raised 2 children alone with courage that matched anything Claire had ever witnessed. And Claire was the bridge, the living thread connecting Evan's sacrifice to its legacy, not a failure, a keeper of flame. That understanding changed the way she touched the rose tattoo. She used to press it hard, to feel the scars underneath, to punish herself, to stay tethered to guilt. Now she traced the petals gently, the way you touch something precious, something that grew out of darkness and reached toward light. The biggest change came from the most unexpected direction. Derek Hayes. After the Sunday meeting, Derek had kept his distance, respectful, quiet, almost invisible. It was so unlike him that some members joked he'd been replaced by a body double. But in December, something happened that nobody saw coming. Derek walked into the garage on a Saturday morning and asked Claire to teach him. Not mechanics. He didn't care about engines. "Teach me what you do," he said. "The way you read people, the way you stay calm, the way you see threats before anyone else. Teach me that." Claire stared at him. "Why?" Derek took a long breath. "Because I'm 44 years old, and I've spent my whole life being the guy people are afraid of. And I just realized that being feared is the loneliest thing in the world." Claire saw something in his face that she recognized. The exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that takes everything and gives nothing back. "Sit down," she said. He sat. "The first thing you need to learn is how to shut up." Derek blinked. "Excuse me? You heard me. You talk to fill silence because silence scares you. But silence is where information lives. You can't read a room if your own voice is drowning everything out." Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. "Good," Claire said. "That's lesson 1. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. Derek didn't become a different person. He was still loud, still blunt, still capable of filling a room, but the edges softened. He started listening before reacting. He started watching before judging. He started asking questions instead of making declarations. And one evening during a chapter gathering, Derek did something that stopped the room cold. A new prospect, 22 years old, eager and nervous, spilled a drink on a senior member's jacket. The room tensed. Everyone expected the explosion. Derek got there first. He put his hand on the kid's shoulder, not aggressive, steady, calm. "Hey, relax. It's a jacket. It'll dry. Grab some napkins and take a breath." The kid looked up with wide eyes. "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir. I'm Derek." The senior member whose jacket was wet looked at Derek like he'd grown a second head. Travis caught Claire's eye across the room. He mouthed 2 words. "You did that." Claire shook her head. She mouthed back, "He did that." And she meant it. Because Claire understood something about change that most people didn't. You can't change someone from the outside. You can only show them a door. They have to walk through it themselves. Derek walked through it clumsily, imperfectly, with setbacks and stumbles and moments where the old Derek flashed through like lightning. But he walked through it, and every time he did, the door opened a little wider. Spring came to Red Creek the way it always did. Slowly, grudgingly, like winter didn't want to let go. On a warm Saturday in April, Claire was in the garage alone. Everyone else had the day off. She was doing what she loved most, working on an engine with no deadline and no pressure, just the pure, meditative rhythm of her hands, solving problems that had clean answers. Her phone buzzed. A photograph from Aisha. Little Evan standing next to a motorcycle he had rebuilt entirely by himself. A 1985 Honda CB450. Rust-red frame, chrome exhaust. The kid was beaming a smile so wide and pure it could have powered the machine he was standing next to. And on his left wrist, barely visible in the photograph, a small tattoo. A rose. Claire dropped the phone. She picked it up, looked again, zoomed in. A rose on his wrist in the exact same spot as hers. Her hands shook, her vision blurred. She called Aisha immediately. "The tattoo on Evan's wrist. When did he get that?" Aisha's voice was soft. "Last month, on his birthday. He say he want to carry the same mark as the woman who carry his name. He say the rose means love does not die, it just changes shape." Claire sat down on the garage floor. Love does not die, it just changes shape. 16 years old, a boy named after a dead man, raised by a mother who survived because of that man's sacrifice. Fixing motorcycles with hands that echoed Claire's hands. Wearing a rose on his wrist because he wanted to be connected to a woman he had never met, but whose story he carried in his blood. Claire pressed the phone against her forehead and cried. Not grief this time. not guilt, not the tears of a woman drowning in the past. These were the tears of a woman who had just discovered that the love she thought she lost didn't disappear, it grew. It crossed oceans, it planted itself in the hearts of children. It bloomed in garage bays and medical schools and mountain towns and everywhere that hands reached out to fix what was broken and heal what was hurt. Evan Hollister was dead. He had been dead for 4 years. He would be dead forever. But his love was alive in every life he touched, and every life those lives touched. And on in an unbroken chain that stretched from a collapsed building in Turkey to a motorcycle garage in Colorado to a 16-year-old boy with a rose on his wrist and grease on his hands in a future that Evan would never see but had made possible with the last breath in his body. Logan found Claire in the garage an hour later. She was back at work. Her eyes were red, but her hands were steady. He looked at her phone, still open to the photograph. He saw the rose on the boy's wrist. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "People see a tattoo and think they know your story. They never realize they only saw one page." Claire looked at him. "You said that to me once before. I meant it then. I mean it more now." Claire set down her wrench. She looked at the photograph one more time. The boy, the bike, the rose, Logan. "Yeah, I think I finally know what home is." She looked around the garage, at the tools hanging on the walls, at the bikes waiting to be healed, at the coffee mug Marcus left on her bench every morning, at the bay where Travis asked his dumb questions, at the workbench where Derek had started leaving breakfast burritos he would never admit to buying. "Home isn't the place where nobody knows your past," Claire said. "Home is the place where people know your past and still choose to stand beside you." Logan nodded once. "Welcome home, Claire." She picked up the wrench. She went back to work, and the rose on her wrist caught the afternoon light streaming through the bay door, not hiding the scar beneath it, not apologizing for it, not explaining it, just blooming, quietly and stubbornly the way roses do, the way love does. The way Clare Morgan finally, after 4 years of running and a lifetime of carrying, learned to do. She stayed. Not because the pain was gone, not because the grief had faded, not because the world suddenly made sense or became simple or stopped asking hard things of her. She stayed because she finally understood that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to bloom anyway. And Clare Morgan decided. She always had. She just finally knew it.